A lot has happened since last time we spoke. The most exciting development is by far the acquisition of a portfolio of gold, copper, and nickel targets in Papua New Guinea to supplement or complement our Colombian story. So that'll be the main focus of this presentation. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the acquisition of the PNG portfolio is a high impact strategy for us, and hopefully by the end of this slide it'll all make sense to you as to why we did this. You might on the surface say, well, PNG is very different to Colombia. In fact, it's actually not. In terms of ESG focus and the geology, the nature of the geology, the types of metals we're hunting, and various other bits and pieces, it actually is very similar to what we have in Colombia. Also in terms of where it is and its evolution as well. Historically, PNG has been the focus of tier one type companies chasing elephants, and they focus on a certain model because they're looking for 5 million plus projects all the time. What that focus does is creates opportunities for juniors to come in, and we're here to leverage that opportunity as we see this as a growing area in PNG in the years to come. Just like it was in Colombia 7 years ago when we entered Colombia, it was the realm of tier ones chasing elephants, and that created opportunities for us to move in and discover things like Tesorito and so on. The areas we have in PNG are all close to tier one type discoveries, which is always a good thing. It also plays to our strengths, and this is an important one. The Quinchilla discovery in Colombia is a mature project now. It's 2.6 million ounces, and we're going through sort of early stage engineering and those sorts of things. But our track record of success is in exploration, and we're well funded. So the focus late last year was to find a project that sort of meets or plays to our strengths, and we reviewed many before we found PNG assets owned by a group called Footprint, which were well and truly under the radar for most, but amazing early stage results. It also, we believe, is timed well to money markets and commodity cycles and so on. And it also launches us into the EV battery space. So some really exciting copper and nickel targets to add to our gold story. And the other reason why this was so compelling to us is that we saw in two of the projects the potential for very easy, early, quick wins and dramatic wins at two projects, one called Kusi and another one called Very Very. And to put a number around what I mean by early stage dramatic, that sample you see there, that's taken off of an outcrop. So it's on the surface. And that it's a polished sample. That grade 61.3 grams per tonne gold and 18% copper on the surface. So that gives you an idea of the opportunity for quick wins here. Next slide, please. So that's the distribution of the Colombian PNG assets. The red ones are ours, and you can see they're all sort of proximal to the big discoveries of PNG, and they sit on that major mountain building range that is the Highlands and the Owen Stanley, just like our Colombian story sits on the Andes range. So similar sorts of geology and orogenesis. Next slide, please. So I want to zoom in onto the Ono project because this is getting immediate attention from us. In particular, a target called Kusi, which you can see there in the middle of the Ono project area. It's relatively short distance to Lae, which is the largest airport in PNG, and shares sort of the same sort of geological regional structures as the multi-million ounce Hidden Valley mine and Wafi-Golpu. Next slide, please. This is a plan view of what we have at Kusi. Now, this has been drilled previously, historically, and there's three holes I want to draw your attention to, and you'll see the results of these on the next slide. But 4, 7, and 3, sort of the southern side, central in this image, they were drilled chasing the porphyry system that's driving this whole regional complex, and they didn't hit that porphyry. But they certainly got spoke, lots of pathfinders and similar to say that it was a porphyry somewhere nearby, but they didn't actually intercept that. But what they drilled what they drilled through in their focus on the elephant, finding the porphyry, was this limestone skarn layer, which is really compelling. That 61 I showed you earlier is from this limestone skarn. They drilled through this layer, this sort of sub-horizontal layer, and that's what we're really interested in immediately in terms of a quick win and immediate drilling. The area we're focused on is in that southern image, so where those 3 drill holes are, and you can see 2 trenches there, 20 meters at 3.84 and a larger one, 71 at nearly 5 grams. But that 71 goes along the unit. It doesn't cross the unit. So the length is a bit misleading. It's not true width or anything close to it, but the grades are obviously still perfectly valid. So what those trenches are doing is it's saying, okay, if we drilled through the ridge of this mountain, and if it's a subhorizontal layer, then it must be exposed somewhere on either side of the mountain. So that's what those trenches were doing. We just walked to the sides of the mountain and said, well, let's see if we can find it. And we found it. But that's just, and that little area down there is really exciting, but it's just a small part of that limestone skarn modeled layer. So that's really exciting, but the potential, this blue layer in this image here, could be enormous. It goes on and on and on to the west, and then bends around the topography, and then should be exposed in the north as well. So whilst we're drilling in this area, and that's exciting enough in its own right, the potential is significant, and we will be exploring that with early stage exploration as we move forward. There is another 2022 discovery made here called Leah's Lode. Off to, you can see there on the the right-hand side of the image, and that delivered 8 meters at 11.5 grams per ton and 2.6% copper. So another spectacular at-surface result that we'll hopefully see some drilling early on as well. Next slide, please. So this is the model representation of what's going on here at Kusi. You can see the 3 drill traces, the black lines going into the mountain and going through that limestone layer. So it's that little limestone layer that is so exciting to us. And you can see the drill results there at 20 meters at 2.8, 35 at 3, and 10.1 meters at 2.39 in the sort of the top of the image there. So they drilled through it, and then they went deeper, and they got the smoke, if you like, the pathfinders and the vectors of the porphyry system, but never actually hit the porphyry itself. So that's where we're focused, that skarn layer. But of course, we have the elephant as part of the story as well down the track. And there's a deeper limestone skarn unit as well, which is really exciting as well. That's sort of the dark blue brick layer there. That is exposed in a valley as well. And the fact that we see elevated silver, lead and zinc there is a strong indicator that it's potentially to the side of some large porphyry intrusive. So very exciting big picture, but also immediate traction on that near surface skarn that's delivering spectacular gold and occasionally really impressive copper grades as well. Next slide, please. The other project that's going to see immediate attention is called Very Very. This is a nickel story in the very southern part of the portfolio. I took this photo. This is the Very Very Creek, and that sample down the bottom that I've circled, that's nickel sulfide. That grades at 23.3% nickel and 10.6 grams per ton gold. Now, I've worked in nickel previously, nickel exploration, and I remember getting excited when we hit something like half a percent. That would be exciting. And here we are hitting 23.3% nickel on the surface in a creek. Next slide, please. Now that sample was not in isolation. This table here represents other samples taken from that creek or very close to the creek. 15% nickel, 11, 10, 19, 15, 23, 6, 26, 15, 45.8. I didn't even know that was chemically possible till I looked into it, that you can have 45.8% nickel and 32.7. So really encouraging high grade nickel float. And it doesn't sound like a very sophisticated geology technique, but basically walking up the creek until you no longer see float tells you in a very small area where this outcrop could be positioned to create this float coming down the creek. So again, early stage, but very focused target opportunity with some potential for some game-changing quick wins here. So that'll see some attention in the immediate future as well. Next slide. Now, there are other projects in the PNG portfolio that are not secondary in terms of their prospectivity, but they just are either larger porphyry type stories or earlier stage. So you don't have the potential for immediate high impact, but still they're spectacular results as evidenced by this piece here. This is another sample at surface sample taken from outcrop. That's 9.5% copper and 156 grams per ton gold at a project called Ube. So incredible results. Next slide, please. So on this map, you can see Ube in the middle of the image there. That sample was taken from an exposure of part of a larger anomaly with very high grade 2% copper, 2%, 2 gram per tonne sections or zones or subsets within that surface anomaly. There's another project to the north of that called Liamu, and particularly a subset of that called Dada, which has porphyry style stockworks right near the surface. So that's another one that's really compelling. And you can see in the map there very, very, which I talked about earlier, in those ridiculously high nickel grades. There's another project, not on this map, but it was on the earlier map that I showed you, called Imu. That's had a quick win or an early win in drilling through a porphyry 305 meters of elevated copper and gold essentially from surface, from 5 meters below surface, including 14 meters at 2.43% copper and 2.78 grams per tonne gold. So really encouraging early start on that one. And there's some other targets in the area like Michael's Creek, which is epithermal, and then ultra high grade gold to reflect that. There's another project called Talia in the north, which is part of the Bismarck complex, and that's delivered some really exciting discoveries for other companies as well. Next slide, please. So very briefly onto the Colombian side of the story. We have two project areas, the Andes project and the Quinchía project, but all of the activity of recent years has been at Quinchía. Next slide, please. To generate 2.6 million ounces at a gram per tonne via 3 deposits in the area, but it's all within a sort of 3 kilometre radius, and Miraflores and Tesorito being the most significant of those two are literally 800 meters apart, but adds up to 2.6 million ounces at a gram. And what's really interesting with Tesorito is it's a porphyry that breaks the surface. It actually daylights, which is very unusual these days. It's usually 100, 200 meters underground. But that bodes well for things like open pit type structures and those sorts of things, because you're getting into high grade right on in early production. Now, we're at the process, as I said at the very beginning, of sort of adding some meat around that 2.6 million ounces now, doing some engineering and those sorts of things to hopefully demonstrate that a gram per tonne near surface is economically compelling. Part of that was metallurgy. So we've done the metallurgical test work on Tesorito, and that gave us a very basic process flow, which is what you want. You don't want anything complex or novel. It's a very simple, vanilla, if you like, process flow, and reasonably robust recoveries at 87%, and nothing in the way of deleterious elements to worry about. So we've ticked that box, and we're going through ticking others now as part of that exercise. The other thing I wanted to raise, another very exciting development for us, is part of our ESG focus. We have a very strong local support in Quinchía. That photo you can see there is me standing next to the mayor receiving an accolade on behalf of the company. But also late last year, we were the winner of the Colombian National ESG Awards for the mining sector, run through the Colombian Gold Symposium. So we were the winner of that for the mining sector in 2022. So we look forward to taking that focus and that skill set we have in ESG and applying that to our PNG projects as well, albeit obviously tailored to the culture and so on of the area. Next slide, please. So where we are after the deal was done with to acquire the PNG assets, we have 715 million shares on issue. As David said at the start, we tend to bounce around 28, 35 million capex at the moment. And we have a reasonably robust treasury for exploration at PNG. If you're interested in research, quite often those companies I've identified there make comment on our announcements. I know Sprott put something out, reasonably deep assessment of the PNG portfolio when we announced the acquisition back in November, and Euros regularly comment on us as well. Next slide, please. So where we are and what's happening in this quarter and moving forward, there's a 3,000 meter drilling program planned for Kusi beginning in the quarter. Supplementing that is the sort of scout work, looking at that larger, trying to understand the total extent of that limestone skarn unit and where does it go to the west, and also getting greater understanding of that incredibly high grade Leah's lode outcrop and what that means. Alongside that, we're doing some early stage work at Very in that high grade nickel story. In Colombia, we're doing some pre-PEA investigations to essentially de-risk the Quinchía resource, so putting some meat around that resource. And what's also happening is the Miraflores EIA submission. This is the last submission to get approvals for development if we choose to go into development. I'm not saying we are, but it gives us the right to go into development at Miraflores, which is a high-grade underground component of that larger 2.6 million ounces. It's about a 450,000 ounce reserve within that resource. So exciting times ahead. We have the funding to support that program, and news flow should be thick and fast in Q1, Q2. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Jason. A great presentation and always plenty going on to keep investors interested. A bit of a question in terms of the PNG asset. Can you just step us back a little bit about and give us some oversight in terms of how did you acquire it and how important are the local vendors, if at all, to the project going forward?
Yeah, it's a really good question, David. This came about in rather just good luck more than anything else. We were reviewing a number of projects because we were well cashed up, and obviously there was a market opportunity for us to look for projects outside of Colombia, mostly in Australia, but sort of broader afield. And John Doe, one of the two founders of the Footprint company, the one that held all those PNG assets, is a globally recognized expert in porphyries. And we asked him to run his ruler over some of the ideas that we were looking at. And that's how the relationship started. And then we discovered that John and his founding partner, Glenn, had been building this portfolio in PNG. And it was just so much more compelling than other targets that we were contemplating. And so we proposed the idea to John, to Glenn, to join us and bring the portfolio along with them. And that's how it all started. So John and Glenn are now part of our team. John is principal geologist for the company now, and Glenn runs the specifics of PNG for us. So we've got that continuity of local knowledge and deep geology experience and so on inside the company now.
And for people who don't know, PNG is well endowed with infrastructure. Lae, as you mentioned, is a bustling city and a great airport with a lot of infrastructure there, and with other mining operations in the vicinity, the ability to access mining infrastructure and people and services is actually not well understood, but clearly in place.
Yeah, well, you are dealing with some very remote areas and very mountainous, so you tend to fall back on helicopters for a lot of the support, and that, of course, adds to the cost of everything you do. But yeah, large-scale mining success in PNG's history with projects like Porgera and Oktedi, and more recently, there's one that we tend to look at a fair bit called K92. It's a ultra high-grade epithermal vein-hosted project. It's a junior that's now a sort of $1 billion plus company listed on the TSX. So we hopefully we emulate that track record.
How positive is it? We've seen the Australian Prime Minister in PNG and very proactively in PNG and reinforcing the trade, security, trade and other commitments between the two countries. How important is that to the development of a project like this?
Oh, look, I think that's really important, obviously, but also what I think is really important, and this came through to me when I was in the field out there, that there is a natural affiliation, if you like, between PNG and Australia. So we are very welcome in the area. Where they know who we are, they know how we act, and we're a very significant part of their history and hopefully a very significant part of their future as well. So that's great. And also, if you look at sort of local regional areas, like I spent 4 nights in the Kusi village, so a very remote village, no sort of connection to roads or anything else. And we were very welcome in the local area. In fact, most evenings, the head of the village had his arm around John, and we would sit down and have dinner together and laugh and similar. So very welcome at that level as well, not just at the political level.
And in terms of Colombia, there's a question here: is Colombia now, given it's moving into the permitting and the approvals phase and some of that additional resource drilling that you touched on, is that now moving into a phase of a joint venture partner or someone coming in to support the development of that project?
That's a possibility, yeah. It's not the only possibility, but it is a possibility, and that's another reason why we're adding meat. I keep on saying meat to the story. It's really anticipating what questions need to be asked to contemplate a development story here. So addressing all those questions. What's the metallurgy like? What's the likely economic performance? What's the pit going to potentially look like? And all those sorts of things. We're answering all those questions along the way now. Yeah.
And in terms of now operating in 2 jurisdictions, it has its challenges, undoubtedly. But are you comfortable with both the operational and the funding element to operating in both jurisdictions?
Yeah, we are. Something that came out of COVID, for me anyway, was to realize that we have an extremely competent executive team in Colombia. So our operations were hardly impacted by COVID because the team did extremely well. So in terms of spreading the executive team or the Australian team too thinly, I don't have a concern about that at all, especially given that John and Glenn have joined us now and they have deep PNG experience. Both of them have a decade plus working for Barrick in PNG. So they have that local knowledge as well. So I'm not concerned about that. In terms of cash, as I mentioned, I think end of Q3, we had 11 million, and obviously we'll update that with the December quarter report coming out before the end of the month. So we've got a really reasonably robust treasury. Of course, exploring in PNG is very expensive because of the isolation and such, but we have a pretty robust treasury.
2 quality projects in 2 forward-looking jurisdictions. Both have their opportunities and both will create much news flow for the company over the next 6 to 12 months. Certainly a company to watch, a hidden gem for sure. Jason, thanks for your time. We look forward to following the story.
Thanks, David.